Hello, everybody. I'm very happy to announce that we have today another coaching conversation session with two very good friends of mine, Simon Whitley and Frank van Frankhoven. And today's topic is about motor learning, what is also called skill acquisition. At the beginning of our conversation today, I would like to share with you one video clip from a TED Talk conference in Vancouver. And I would kindly ask my two friends to comment on this after seeing the clip. Oh, it goes.
The second lesson we've learned about the brain is that there is no one-size-fits-all approach to learning. So there's no recipe for learning. Consider the popular belief that it takes 10,000 hours of practice to learn and to master a new motor skill. Now, I can assure you it is not quite that simple. For some of us, it's going to take a lot more practice, and for others, it may take far less. So the shaping of our plastic brains it's far too unique for there to be any single intervention that's going to work for all of us. And now this realization has forced us to consider something called personalized medicine. So this is the idea that to optimize outcomes, each individual requires their own intervention.
So it was a short video clip, but I think very interesting statements there. So what is your opinion about what we just heard?
Well, let me start to say something about it. What we did, of course, as coaches and probably people in the field of research, to study the way we execute whatever movement it is. And then we also like to study the way people are successful. That we use as a guideline for teaching. So both the intensity or the frequency of training, the number of repetitions, and then also the content of what we practice, that we see a certain movement and we think this is really the best and that's what we like to teach. So it's actually statistics from after what happened, and that changes all the time. And what she says here is there's no one way to do it, the best way. And we as coaches, we love technique. We all do. And the mistake we make is probably that we deliver the same message and the same teaching to every player. And I'm very glad with the statement she makes that it should be like a medicine. It should be adapted to the person and to the problem.
Yeah. Simon?
Just to add to that, I think, she talks a lot about the research that was done by Ericsson on, in order to develop a level of mastery in your chosen endeavor, that could be a minimum of 10,000 hours. And of course, there is some truth to that, but the reality is it could be way more than that, and it could be perhaps less, depending on the skill that's required in order to maximize your potential at an elite level. So I think that the first thing is for us as coaches, parents, players to understand is that when we try to piece things down to the amount of hours you need, learning is a very difficult formula to try and replicate amongst other people. So that's why the individualization doctrine is, in my opinion, so much more powerful, because it really does depend on your individual circumstances. That's why you can have a Grand Slam champion from Spain, from Serbia, from Switzerland, from Canada, from Australia, because and they've all been exposed to a very different type of learning and training environment and had very different experiences from that. And Flourish will kind of reach its potential. Talent will reach its potential once the player has been exposed to different types of experiences and then put amongst the peers, and then it's a race against survival, right, to see who's the fittest and who will come up as a champion. So what I like about the clip is that she says, look, there's been a lot of research that says that there's a minimum amount of hours that for something that's a complicated skill to achieve in order to be a level of mastery in your chosen discipline. However, how you get to those amount of hours and the exact amount of hours is very, very individual. And us as coaches and parents and players shouldn't try to project a template from the past of someone else onto the here and now in the present with your individual player, child, son, athlete, whatever, because it really does depend on so many multivariant circumstances in what is needed for that player to flourish in the future. So I think we've learned from the past. There's been some really good research. It's made us realize that those 10,000 hours also don't need to be done in a race, that they're spaced out over time, and it's not 10,000 hours, and how you deliver those 10,000 hours need to be done in a very, very organic, implicit, playful way, not just always a structured play all the time. That we need people to be exposed to different types of experiences in those 10,000 hours.
Good. So thank you for this. And actually then a question that appeared to me immediately, like following what you just said, is actually what drives learning? When I was thinking about it by myself, listening to you and reflecting about my own philosophy, I would like to say that for me, intention drives the learning and situation shapes it. It's very easy to follow when we are looking at the way the kids learning to walk. They learn to walk because they want to catch something, to turn them, to move them. And actually the way we create the environment around them is actually very important, because I don't think that anybody or any parent would bring the kid to learn walking on ice, because obviously they will learn to walk like spiders probably, and not like human beings. So I feel that it's very important when we think about motor learning. Also, we have to consider these two things: the intention, what can be also tactical intention of the stroke when we transfer it now to tennis, and then the environment in which this stroke is delivered and actually developed.
Sure, I like that. Instead of intention, you can also think of the need or the wish to be able to do something like another person, or to get a skill to compete, or like you talked about the baby sees us move around, they also want to do that, and so they will try to move forward, and when they do, they start to run. So there's almost no cognitive element there. Of course, in the brain, there's a lot of things happening, but not with words from the parents in telling them how to move their feet. So it's interesting to see that the situation there, the environment, is shaping their movements, and we challenge them, and they challenge themselves. So that's a very important element. So I like the expression you use for that.
Just to add to that, if I may offer a slight definition of learning, and look, there are a lot of definitions of learning out there, but it's one that has stuck with me, that it really is about trying to create a permanent change in behavior. That's what learning is. And so it links to your question, Avoya, because what drives learning? Well, as you said, then children especially are habitual creatures. They want to try and learn through imagery. And they want to try and learn through replicating play. So, young children will always play mum and dad, and they'll always play doctors and nurses and cops and robbers, and they'll take on the role of people that they are not, and learn through that role. So they'll learn to be through other beings. And I think that's an amazing, fascinating thing for young children. And often they're coached out of that as they're older. They're told to be their self and to be their own authentic self, which of course is true as well. It's not a falsism, it's a truism. However, when young children are very young, that they're often learning through mimicry and imagery, that they're learning through visual, kinesthetic, verbal ways. But at a very young age, they really do copy. And I think that really does drive their learning. And I actually liked what, I don't know if you've read the word from David Kolb, but he said that, when children learn, that they have to be exposed to some type of concrete experience. It can't just be virtual, right? They have to have a concrete experience. Then they'll reflect upon that, what they've done and what they've seen. Then they'll actually engage in a process called abstract conceptualization, which is they'll conclude from that experience, and then they'll start to actively experiment from that. And then the cycle begins again. So children all the time are going through these learning cycles, either at school or at home or at their soft play at the weekends or in their sporting environments. But I do believe children are trying to do almost two things. They're trying to learn to get better at what they've started, and they're learning to do things that they haven't yet started. So the walking one's a good example. That's learning a new skill. But a lot of the time, the forehands are not new skills to players, but there could be a new adaptation to what they're trying to practice with that they're trying to improve a lot more to have an optimum performance. So there's always like learning new things and getting better at what you're doing, but both are essentially being part of a learning cycle.
These are obviously truth what you just said. And I believe we all three agree on this. But when I'm looking around in the coaching world, especially in tennis coaching, what I see is that very often still the coaches are looking for the recipes. They are trying to teach the strokes. They are trying to actually copy paste to the players what they are doing. And I'm asking myself, so why actually is so difficult for coaching community to embrace this approach, to be more individual, to be more variable, to use more intuitive ways of learning?
Well, that's of course something that is we find everywhere. The three of us have been to many parts in the world, a lot of countries, and the question that we always get is, which forehand is the best forehand in men's tennis? And then they hope that we as experts would say, oh, it's Roger Federer, or no, it's Djokovic, or it's Nadal. Well, and I always tell them, like, you should ask their opponents which one is the best, because it is not about what it looks like, it's how it hurts the opponent. And you can be sure that guys with totally different forehands like Del Potro and the three I mentioned before, that all those forehands are really hurting the opponent. So we should teach the principles behind that instead of the shape. And what we love, that was my first reaction after this video clip from the TED Talk, we love to find out a successful forehand, look at the principles, and then we teach that movement. And that is where I think it goes wrong, because we believe that if we teach that movement, that the forehand will be as good. And I'm very sure in case Nadal would have tried to shape his forehand the way Federer plays, or Djokovic would have shaped his forehand the way Del Potro plays, then probably we would never have heard of those guys. Yeah. The fact that they could deliver a forehand the way they hit the ball is a personal thing and makes it so successful.
Simon, can I just jump in? And actually, there is one more thing that I believe in the last 15 years or even longer became very important element of the modern teaching in tennis. And I know that in LTA you tried several things in that direction, and that's actually about how to use scaled equipment, smaller rackets, softer balls, and smaller courts, because this is actually part of the modern teaching methodology, how we call it, related to the environment. And I believe this is very important, because I also, yesterday, that's a good thing for all of us that are preaching that for a long time. I saw the video clip from Emma Raducanu when she played actually orange court competitions. And that's actually a great message that you can become Grand Slam champion when you play orange ball and orange court.
Yeah, absolutely. We just needed to wait for it to happen. We needed to wait for that generation to come through and to realize that, look, what you do at every stage of your tennis career matters. So what you do at 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, it is important. It's not like it's more or less important, because it often motivates you to move to the next level of tennis and to the next level, to the next age group. So I always remember Stephen Martins, the Belgian technical director of the LTA at the time, saying, Simon, it's really important to look after the little ones, because one day the little ones become the big ones. And it always stuck with me that so investment and resources and the quality of coaching, got to really focus on it there. And to go back to your question, okay, smaller balls, lighter balls, smaller rackets, lighter rackets, smaller courts. Well, of course, the ironic thing about them, Voye, is that they're not smaller courts. They're exactly the right size court for the level of the player and the age of the player. So they're actually not smaller courts. They're smaller courts to us as adults, but they're not smaller courts to children. They are exactly the scale of the tennis court that we would play on. So it's always made me laugh that when people have said, oh, we don't want kids playing on smaller courts. It's like, Jesus, you've got it so wrong. It's not about a smaller court. It's exactly the right scale of court that we play on. It would be like us playing on a cricket pitch. It would just be far too big. The technique would have to change. The equipment would have to change. And therefore, the technical skill development changes. You are much less skillful, you're much less exposed to situations in offense, defense, transition into the net. So it's really important for children, if they're going to learn, to have natural technique. I mean, you can put a 7-year-old on the baseline and you can feed a yellow ball very slowly and stand at the net and volley the ball back, a bit like the South Americans, and the Spanish would be big advocates of that, actually. And like, who am I to say that they're wrong and I'm right? All I'm going to give you is a narrative to why I think we are more developmentally right at the 12 and under age group. Is yes, you can lower the impact point, you can slow the outgoing ball to the player and then give them a nice lighter ball for them to make contact, but still it's not the game that they will play at the older age group. So if we can make children have an exciting game at 7, 8, 9, 10 because of smaller courts, the right size court, racket and ball, then actually I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I think that that's the right road to go down for participation. It makes sense because it's easier to do. So it's easier than playing with the yellow ball, bouncing over your head, having ridiculous grips and high contact points and just pushing the ball back. That's terrible for your skill development. Secondly, it's better for performance because as they match against someone else that's very good at orange, like in the clip that you talk about, they then push their tennis to the next level. And you've got no idea what that will do for them developmentally because it will transition them into the next stage and the next stage. So when they start to play 12s, 14s, 16s, there will already be a better pair from being exposed to those modified equipment.
Actually, I want to share with you, if you are not aware, that a while ago, I think around a month and a half ago, ITF has sent out the invitation to the national associations to test different heights of the nets, because the research shows that was conducted in Australia, that actually the net height is actually very important, how it shapes the strokes of the player. From my own experience, I realized that one of the strokes that is mostly affected, in my opinion, with the wrong environment for the young players is actually serve. Especially when they move from orange to green. They move almost 2 meters back with the regular net height and the regular service box. It's unbelievable change. And very often we call it also green slump. Yeah, when we see this actually like a deteriorating of the skills. So I'm asking myself why it's actually waiting. It's waited so long for such a thing. Frank, you have been also for a very long time with KNLTB. I'm sure that you have been thinking about different ways to help players to develop.
Sure. You use the principle of adjusting all the things like the net height, the size of the court, the width of the court, the length of the court to the size of the kid. And with the example Simon just gave, and you added to that, remember the ITF made a clip many years ago, and they went the other way. Like if we as adults would have this bigger court, and Simon mentioned the cricket court, but then you would have a racket like this, and the racket was huge, like one of those advertising rackets or rackets they have in the window. And then how it would look like if you would have to swing that racket, it would be impossible to play. We couldn't. Yeah. And that shows in an exaggerated way the problem for kids, and the fact that you can hit one ideally arriving ball and you can hit it over the net from the baseline is not the proof that the kids can play the game. So that is the struggle that you have to deal with. So playing with lines, net height, and balls is really the way to make it natural for the kids to find solutions to play the game.
Yeah. Just to add to that, if I may, Avoye, I read the research from Tennis Australia, and Macca Reid he really raised my awareness to this. Dr. Macca Reid, he said that actually the net height for the red ball, so like 7 and under, was too high. I've always felt that a little bit. I always felt that the trajectory of the serve, because they're still small little kids at that age, that the red height of being 80 centimeters is just slightly too high. So I would actually lower that to maybe like 60, 70 centimeters, and I would make the red court slightly longer. The red court's just slightly too short. In fact, years ago, the red court used to be a badminton court. Remember that? Short tennis, it was called, from the Swedes. And or the Czechs, I can't remember which one it was. But certainly short tennis was actually on a badminton sized court, which was always longer than a mini red court across a tennis court. So I think we made a slightly faux pas there, where we could have probably lengthened that out. a bit more. But I like what the Austrians have done, where they have the lime green baseline, which is a transition orange to green court. I know that adding complexity to the colors, and how many colors do we need? It's you know, it's like a rainbow at the moment, the amount of colors we're using: blue, red, orange, green. But the lime green color does give that, it does mitigate against what you were saying then, Havoye, the transition from orange to green. Although what I would say is, yes, the first serve gets worse from orange to green, or doesn't get better, or has a slump, a dip. But I actually think the second serve gets better, because the children have to learn to spin the ball more in order to beat the trajectory. And therefore, yes, the first serve, flat trajectory, fast, the intercontact point between contact point and contact point, the time between that lowers. Therefore, it's a bit more slower, the tempo. However, what you do get is the development of the second serve starting to occur, which of course has advantages then for yellow ball.
Of course. Obviously, we all agree that different courts, balls, net heights are influencing the way that the players shape their movement, their strokes. And obviously it can be also one of the obstacles. Obviously that's for sure not the only possible obstacle in learning the skill. So from your experience, what are perhaps the other obstacles that from players' perspective to learn new motor skills?
Well, I would like to take that into a different direction. That earlier this conversation, we talked about the recipe approach coaches would love to have, like, how should I teach this or that? And when it becomes a recipe, it's like, even though you don't need step number 2 or step number 4, I will still do it because that's how they taught me to teach the forehand. And when we adapt our teaching to the learning of the player, like the lady in the TED Talk told us, it means that we have to look for what they need as a next step. And in the recipe approach, coaches would do just the order that they've learned, and that's a totally different thing. So if you want to adapt to the learning strategy of the player, we have to see what they need as a next step. And if that means they have to get a bit closer to the net, or a bit further away, or with a higher net or lower net, that's all agreeable. You know, it's all good as long as you have purpose. And I don't like it when you just have the fixed method with all those steps that you need to follow, because then they will be good players. That's method-centered instead of learner-centered.
Yeah, well, just to jump on that, I think a checklist is fine for assessment, but a checklist is not fine for teaching. It's just for assessment. Like a pilot will have a checklist before they leave the ground. Check, 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 in order to not miss anything, in order to have a wider lens to ensure they follow the necessary steps in order to leave the ground. However, when you teach dot to dot, when people don't need it, unnecessary teaching is the biggest pandemic in coaching right now. So why teach that player to bend their knees when they are already bending their knees, just because you've been taught to say bend your knees? And often what happens is we teach. It's like, you know, we say that we become the best and worst versions of our parents, and I think there's some truth in that. I certainly hear myself saying things that my dad said to me, and it takes a real kind of articulate, intelligent coach to filter through the ambient noise in coaching phrases and to say, no, I'm not going to say that. I say that. I don't need to say that. I need to say that. And to choose carefully the verbal conversation intervention you're going to give to your player. And I think that's why I think the problem is, Frank, is that we teach the way we see the stroke, and we see it over time. So we see it from start to finish. So, okay, kids, ready, position. Now circle your arm, swing up the mountain and finish over your shoulders. I would hear a lot of coaches in the UK. I used to coach like that. I'm going to put my hands up here. I taught the way I saw it happen in order. And I think a lot of people teach that way. You put the pen to the paper, you draw a big S, and then, because that's the order it does happen. It was a light bulb moment in my coaching when I met the Belgians. And they said, look, we teach from the contact point back. We don't teach from the start to the finish. We just say, look, just keep the racket close to the ball and just tap it over. That's it. Keep no swing. Just tap it over. Keep the hand really close to the ball. Keep your racket really close to the ball. And then as you go back in a bit of a longer court, then you start to swing a bit longer. And then as you go back, then you start to loop it up. And that was a real transformational moment in my understanding of learning, because I realized that I was helping the player to achieve the task. not trying to imprint on them a model of the final skill.
And that is one of the key things in the first example where they had to lift the arm and do their full movement. That's where you teach a movement. And we have the strong belief that by teaching the proper movement, later on, they will be great players.
Yeah.
And in the second example, you gave the credits here to the Belgians, but actually, I think it goes back much further more.
Sure.
Because Dennis Vandermeer worked with this gradual length method, where you would grip the racket shorter, close to the racket face, and the strings, and then gradually you go a bit further, the movement would increase, etc. And there are other people who have been very good in developing that. We had a Dutch coach also, like in the 50s and 60s, who approached it like that. But we are so fond of the ultimate result at the end, like the way it looks when Djokovic hits the ball, that we try to teach that. So we are actually teaching kids things that are fit for adults. And that's where we go wrong. We should teach principles that are in it. And then from these principles, the movement can grow, can improve, and you can take it to the bigger court when they're also taller themselves and up to playing adult tennis.
But like you said, it's a very different narrative, isn't it? It's like, as a coach, do I want to teach what cosmetically will look right in the future? Right. Or do I teach them to be more immediately successful at the task? Knowing, and this is the humility and the safety, knowing that just because I teach them to bunt the ball over in a bit of a horrible way, it doesn't matter, because they're not going to be like that forever, but they're going to be successful now. And because they're successful now, they may feel tennis is part of their identity. They may feel they're good at tennis. They can serve, rally, score, which means they can play competitions. They can join a club and I think that, to me, is a much more developmental narrative to have than going, no, I know I'm right. I know you point there. I know you point there. I know you point there. And every player finishes there. And another year's time, 2 years' time, they're going to have it and they'll be fine. Well, right. Yeah, but it's 2021 and a lot can happen in a year, and your child could say bye-bye, or they could have a really terrible experience, or they could leave you as a coach. And there's just so many what ifs there. And they just learn to hit balls. They don't learn to play tennis.
And that's where...
Okay. Yeah. Please go on, Frank.
Okay, what I want to say is that's where parents come in, because parents were taught in the old way, the old-fashioned way. So they think you are a great technique coach in case you would teach them the ultimate forehand that they need in 10 years from now. But when you teach just to tap the ball, have the contact point, control the ball a little bit, and then do that, they say, this is bad technique, so this is a bad coach. So we also have to inform the parents about what we're doing. And then the secret behind it for us is that you will challenge the kids every time to do a little bit more. So you have to move borders of the skills, which is taking automatically the movement along with it. That's where we use the expression form follows function. When you make the function more difficult, the movement has to follow it, and you have to enable the person to accomplish the task that you give them. So that comes to what we call constraints-led learning, where you find an environment, you give them a task where they can gradually get to improve the skills so that they keep growing as a player.
Just to jump in to your conversation, sorry for interrupting you guys. Yeah?
No, please.
Recently I listened to a presentation from Wayne Alderton, who is in charge of coach education in Tennis Canada. And he used the phrase that actually we should coach the ball, not the player. So what I mean coach the ball is actually what he wants to do with the ball. And I like this phrase because it's really orientating on what player has to do with the ball, and by actually increasing the difficulty of the task, what to do with the ball, actually will make them also understand why it's important to, let's say, focus on some parts of the technique sometimes, or sometimes you have to also correct, obviously, and so on. So it's very nice, and I think it's a good expression to coach the ball, what to do with the ball. And it helps actually in both what you are saying, because both of you said, like Simon, I want him to be successful in the task, and so on. So it's actually, I believe, good phrase to connect it together.
Yeah, it's close. It's close to the thing, close to the thing I mentioned about the function.
Yeah.
The function is always in how the ball bounces or the angle the ball makes on the court, you know. So it's also about the ball. We call it function. And I'm happy with the way Wayne Elverton explains it, like you coach the ball. Of course, the ball is just like the example of by Simon. He mentioned the checklist. I love a checklist for complicated things. The only thing is the plane doesn't learn. So we still have to fly the plane as a pilot. And also here, the ball doesn't learn. But we have to think of what the ball does. So the principle is the same. It's not the movement that we teach. It is handling the ball in such a way that we play the game and then moving borders, challenging them, make it fun, make it exciting.
What interests me here, boy, like you come from an Eastern European background. I wanted to bring you in on this. And you know, what is the overall cultural approach to teaching technique in places like Croatia and Eastern Europe and Russia? And because in the UK, we had an assumption that they just do cross-court forehands all day long. They don't care about technique. They just drill them, and they get really good. And then, whereas our players are taught to look very efficient and very fluid, and of course, and then of course, you probably think our players look good technically but can't win a match, and we think you guys can win matches but you don't look good. So there's this real kind of, and that's a very simplistic way of how some people could view the divide culturally, technically on Eastern Europe versus Western America. But just talk about that. I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, interesting question. What I can say about it, Simon, first of all, you know that the scientific approach to sport actually is coming from Soviet Union.
Right.
They developed it in order to compete with Western countries in number of medals won at the Olympics. And the whole science at the beginning was connected with the sports that were bringing a lot of medals, like gymnastics, like swimming, like weightlifting. And you all understand already these are pretty close skill sports compared to the games. And also the principal theory behind the science was so-called control theory that said the more elements I'm controlling, I will be better controlling the outcome of the system. So by this approach, obviously, it's very important that you identify the steps, you know exactly what you are working on, and it works very well in close skill sports, like in golf, for example. It's very simple. There are 3 steps that one golf pro told me to think about, and it really works very good for me in order to control the direction of the shot. So, but in an open skill sport like tennis, it's different. Because of that also, I believe, because it traditionally was embedded in Eastern European education, and still I believe is at the universities, the coaches and players are following the tradition. But I also have to say that they are opening more and more.
Great.
On the other side, what you mentioned also about practicing one shot. Yeah, there is one saying from Bruce Lee. I don't know if you hear that. You know who is Bruce Lee? I hope you guys are pretty old. Yeah? So you know. So he said actually that I don't fear the fighter who knows 10,000 strokes, the ways to hit me. But I fear one that actually practice one stroke 10,000 times a day. So actually to become perfect in something. So it's again connected with these 10,000 hours perhaps. And also I believe it's about repetition that we have to do. I'm asking also myself, because now I'm involved in coaching my son and his group of the friends, players that are 10 years old, and trying to actually work a lot with this principle of variability, not to actually repeat the same strokes. But what I realized that especially before they go to the competitions, it's pretty important to make, I would call it a series of sessions in which you would create stability. So just bringing always new things and new variations is great to develop skills. But when you have to play, you have to know that you will hit the ball where you are aiming for.
Yeah,
That's
that was
what a
something.
good friend of mine calls self-confidence. When I'm hitting the ball and I know that I will hit where I'm aiming for, then I am confident. And he was number 16 in the world, so I trust when he's saying something like that.
I think that's something that Louis Caillot, obviously we know well, but all three of us, he would say that the role of the coach is to always develop and maintain. And, once you develop the rallying skills of a player, it's your job to maintain those skills so they can sustain it under the pressure of competition. And once you've developed the chopper grip on the first serve, you have to maintain it because kids' grip slips around as they're learning. And so, and I think as coaches, we can sometimes forget that. We can sometimes want to move on to the next thing. We're always looking for the next level of progress. It's like, yeah, but come on, they're losing the grip. And that's when we say, oh, they're not doing the basics well. Well, they were doing the basics well, but you're in such a rush to try and push and expand their repertoire of skills that you've actually forgotten to maintain those ones as well. So you have to maintain and develop in tandem with each other. And that takes a certain level of mindset from the coach to be what we call brilliantly boring. You have to be brilliantly boring at doing the same stuff over again. And that's the image that we don't want, is it's like kids just hitting cross-court forehands all day. Well, you do have to hit cross-court forehands all day if you want to be a good tennis player, but it's how you do it and how you sell the story and the game situation and for how much time do you have to do that for, and lots of breaks and point play and then basket feed and cooperative feed. And there's loads of ways you can structure your sessions to do, well, in skill acquisition in the UK, I don't know if you know the phrase, it's called repetition without repetition. You need repetition, but you don't necessarily need to do the same thing every day, all day long in order to get good.
What I can just add to this, and in order to provoke perhaps Frank to react, is actually it doesn't matter actually so much the drill that you are doing, but it's much more important the way how you do that.
Yeah.
So I think that's also part of the answer to your previous question, Simon, about success of the, let's say, Eastern European players that perhaps don't practice all of them with the most modern methodology. But the passion, the attitude, I believe that's something what they are bringing in, and that's a part of the answer. Please, Frank.
Yeah, it's not provocative at all for me, that one, because it is always about having a purpose when you practice. So when you think of practicing cross-court shots and being consistent there, I can actually hit with my other hand. So with my left hand, I'm a right-hander. I can play a backhand cross-court rally or forehand rally, but and be very consistent, but at such a low level that everyone can beat me. So it's not about just hitting it back and not making mistakes. It's about the quality. Of course, we know. So you have to guard this quality of the shot, being consistent with that. And for many years in our courses in the Netherlands, we had a very simple graph that showed that you have all these ingredients, these functions, as I call it. And every time when you add another thing, whether it's precision or more spin or more ball speed, every time when you add something, your consistency is going down shortly. You have to rebuild that. And you have to be confident in doing that. And you can gradually start to add something more. And that means that when you have all these ingredients that make it a world-class forehand, you need to be very consistent in doing that. And one element that we didn't talk about yet is when you talk about different cultures of training. And Simon asked you to tell us a little bit about the let's say, East European culture. It is another important element when you talk about the training discipline, as I would call it, or a professional approach to practice. And the other thing is what you practice, so the content of your practice. And very often I think people are confused about that. So they think it's a good practice because I make you work like crazy as players. And then, oh, Frank has a great training. Look, they're sweating. They're really destroyed after 1.5 hours. This is such a good practice. And then when you look at the quality of the shots, it's not there. But there are also coaches who have a lot of variety. They look for quality, but you don't work as hard. It's more like freewheeling, and that's also not enough. Yeah. So it's not about how many variations you practice. No, it's every time about what does this player need to add quality so that tomorrow he may have already a little bit more quality on the forehand or the serve or whatever shot it is. So repeating a lot without doing the same exactly. Even Nadal, in his biography, he said, like, I've hit millions of forehands. Every shot is a little bit different. Every shot is a little bit different. And that guy knows about that. He has to work on it, keep working on it, because it's not the same repetition. If you would make exactly the same movement on a little bit different ball, he would hit it down into the net or back in the fence. So that's for us so important that we work on quality of repetition and try to move borders, challenge our players to have better shots in combination or in isolation or whatever. There's so many options.
I think that word consistency is misunderstood, Frank, because I think when people use the word consistency, repetition, you know, they associate it with rallying and rally threshold, not missing. You know, I need to be more consistent, make less errors. And it's like, yeah, but not just when you rally. You need consistency when you're rallying. You need consistency when you're attacking, and you need consistency in defense as well. Sure. No one practices consistency in defense. Like everyone always practices consistency while trying to out-rally their opponent. Come on, 50 shots past the service line, 50 shots past the service line. And that's what we talk about the tennis experience for young children. We need to be more creative because as the modern learner, because what we're talking about now is the modern learner, not people that have learned years ago. Because I understand why some people are not proponents of mini tennis. I get it. Like Bob Brett wasn't a massive proponent of mini tennis, nor was Nick Bollettieri. And it's because they've been so successful without it. So why on earth would they be big fans of it? It's like they've never used it. They didn't need it. They were successful without it. So why should we try and convince them? Don't try and convince those type of people that they've already come out with their mind. They've already their opinion is concluded. What we need to do is to try and persuade the younger coaches and mold the disciples of the mini tennis narrative to say, look, yes, in the past, it wasn't around as much and it wasn't as structured, therefore it wasn't needed. Good players came out of any system. But in the future, we know now, Emma Raducanu clip's a good example of that, and there's been others, that they were exposed to red, orange, and green. Actually, what you'll find is that most, even the top tennis players of today, the Murray, the Federer, Serena, most of them were exposed to at least one of the ball colors. Very few of them are exposed to red, orange, and green for equal lengths of time. Some lots of red, bit of orange, bit of green. Some bit of green, but no red and orange. Some orange, but some mini tennis version of the game they were done. Because if you're the Spanish teacher, sorry to use the Spanish as an example, but they do a lot of volley feeding to the player, right? And then the ball lands lower. But you have to be a good coach, first of all. You have to be quite a good feeder at the net to make that ball. They're hitting ground strokes, little 8-year-old John hitting ground strokes from the baseline on the clay up here. And then the coach has to volley the ball perfectly to sit low enough for the player to hit the ball back at a speed that's almost babying them. So everyone thinks, oh, it's advancing their skills by playing on the full court. No. You've got it so wrong. You're actually babying them in order for them to be successful. Whereas you can go on with that 8-year-old on a mini orange court and you can rip the ball at them and they can play at a tempo that more replicates the demands of the game. So sorry to come back to that, but it just linked to this whole idea around learning, skills, repetition, challenging the status quo thinking around always doing the same thing over and over again. But learning through developing and maintaining skills, I think, is the doctrine that will help everyone really develop skillful players.
I believe that now our conversation leads us actually to another topic, and that's actually how to integrate all these skills together, how to integrate development of the technical skills that we were referring mostly, I would say, in our conversation today, together with linking these technical skills with tactical, mental, and motor skills. And I believe all three of us are convinced that integrated training or holistic approach to practice is the answer. Very often in my courses and when I'm presenting to the coaches, I try to link at least two elements, tactical and technical. So we like to say that tactics precede the techniques, actually, to understand what we want to do with the ball, and actually then to help the players to do it better with their technical skills. I know, right, Simon, that you have been actually doing some research in integrated practice. So can you share with our audience actually the outcomes of your research in this approach?
Sure. Well, research perhaps could be a slightly advanced phrase for it, but certainly I've been thinking about this through, and that was my time with Louis Kerr at the LTA. We were banning this around this whole idea of, well, how is the evolution of the game gone? And clearly we had coaches that didn't know a lot about technique. Technique was pretty basic years and years ago. Let's go back a long time, and it was mainly around tactics. Stand here, hit the ball high, in doubles, avoid the net player. It was basic tips, tactics, positioning, where to stand. And then as the game progressed and our understanding of science progressed, we started to understand more about technique. And I'm not saying we didn't talk about technique in the 30s, 40s, 50s, and 60s, but we didn't really know that much. We didn't have video analysis and all that kind of thing. Then I really believe through the kind of, well, probably 80s and 90s, there was a big surge in biomechanical understanding. The ITF introduced biomech, and a lot of coaches were trained to really see inertia and opposite force. And it was probably too sciencey, in my opinion. I don't necessarily think it really helped coaches with the technical checklist that much, but that's just my own personal opinion. Now, we got to a stage now where we realized that then the game-based approach was something that was absolutely essential in tennis, because we need to teach the skills that are linked to the game situation the player is in. So second serve kick to the backhand, approaching the net with a side spin down the line, hitting a drop shot from just inside the baseline the backhand, returning the serve with a deep ball down the middle. So all the skills that are in each of those different situations are different. It's like Frank said, they all require a slightly different recipe of execution and movement. And therefore there's no such thing as the forehand, but the forehands. Yes, you need a neutral warm-up forehand, and that's just your neutral technique that you hit a lot of. But you need adaptation when the ball is high, when the ball is low, when you're approaching the net, when you're slicing in defense versus when you're slicing in offense. They're all very, very different. And it becomes a monster in many ways, because you realize there are so many skills to be good at tennis. But a lot of those can be learned implicitly if you use the right environment, the right court size, the right size net and task. So you can learn a lot of those things without having to teach a lot of those things. Now, the integrated approach is essentially one that we talk about being the performer and the tennis player. Performer being head, heart, athlete. So that's the psychological and physiological. And then the tennis player is more the tactical and technical skills. Well, the tennis skills are often taught through a game-based approach. So you need a game situation at serve, return, both back, approaching at the net. You need to be in some type of phase of play. Are you attacking, rallying, or defending? And you need to have some type of basic tactical intention. Are you trying to attack with power, precision, or take the ball early? Are you trying to defend by staying in the point? Are you trying to turn the point around? You need some type of intention. And then from that intention, you can then start to select the exact technical skills that you need in order to be successful at executing your intention. And that was essentially that whenever you go to the court, you always set it up in a game-based approach. So you always pick a game situation. You always singles or doubles. Is it serving, returning, both back? Well, what's the game situation? That's the game-based approach. But when you feed back, you don't just feed back technically. You don't just feed back tactically. You could feed back talking to the head. Come on, man, focus. You're losing your concentration now. Look, focus on the target, trajectory. Come on. You could focus to the heart. Come on, man, you got to try. Chase that ball down. Never let bounce twice. Come on, beat the bounce. Get behind the ball. Or you could focus on the athlete. You know, you didn't run fast on that one. You were really slow to react, really read the ball quicker. Whatever it is, you know, balance, agility, coordination, speed, strength. Come on, be more powerful in the first serve. Really go on into the shot. But whatever you feed back on, it's linked to the skills that they actually need. And that's not just tactics and technique. An integrated coach is someone that can go to the court and speak quite carefully and appropriately and confidently around the psychological and the physiological interventions that are needed for the player. And we shouldn't just rely on the sports psychologist and the physical trainer to do that. So sorry, it's a long response, but there's a story to how we got to that. And I think it's worth discussing anyway.
I think that we actually went through many things already in the last 45 minutes and started with individualized learning skills. Now we came to integrated approach and game-based approach in learning tennis. And I believe we touched many things. Perhaps it's a good time, Frank, that after listening all of this, you can put some kind of the package for the coaches or the guidelines. What would be, from your point of view, like a key guidelines for the coaches by developing skills by the tennis players to follow now in the modern times and to actually use perhaps the good things from the traditional approach, but to add these new ideas that we are learning from the science and the research today?
So I think we actually touched it in all our comments so far. That when I mentioned the constraints-led learning, it means that you will set the situation in such a way that the player should have to discover the movement that he needs to get the ball there. So when you mentioned Wayne Alderton's coaching the ball, when I use the word function, it's something that you want to accomplish, and the body has to find a solution. Now, many brains are capable of directing the muscles in such a way that you can accomplish it. And when players can find it themselves and find themselves successful, that is a great key to learning. They will not forget, they know they can do it. And then one of the criticisms I got in the Netherlands when explaining this is, yeah, but technique, we have to give feedback on the technique, on the movement. And of course, I also use technique interventions. I give them corrections on how to move more effective. But I only do it when they cannot find a solution. And then again, there's this perception of people who are watching this. If I would immediately tell them to put their foot like this, have their elbow there and finish there and do the things like, you know, whatever the movement looks like or should look like, then people think I'm a great technique coach. But actually, I think a coach is a great technique coach when the player is able to get the ball where he would like it to go, or where the game of tennis challenges us to have the ball going, to make it difficult for the opponent to find an answer. So the constraint-led learning is, I think, the key, that we have to think, what do we need in a match when we play another person, and have them try to discover the possibilities and help them if they cannot find the answer. So that would be my advice for people to explore this kind of learning, because by experience, I know it goes much faster and it's more effective, because you will not forget the thing that you discovered yourself, and you may forget what the coach has told you to do.
Thank you, Frank. And before we finish, I would like to ask Simon also, can you also add a few more, like a last thoughts to this conversation?
Sure. Just a quick question back to Frank, if I may. Frank, you talked about the role of the coaches to help the player to achieve the intent, the outcome of the intention, right? So what if the player is doing that, but with a technique that you know is not efficient for the future? What do you do? You know, maybe that would cause an injury, or perhaps you just know it wouldn't sustain the high levels of the game. Perhaps their forehand's too big around here, or contact point is late or something. So they're effective. They find a way to hit the target, and they're successful. But you just know that you need to make some type of change with the player in order to bring about a future evolved forehand or backhand or whatever stroke.
Yeah, I'm very happy with that question, because that's an essential element. It's never about being happy as a coach that you as a player can now accomplish this task that I gave you. But when I see that this is a way of moving that may be hindering you from making the next step, or it could be very strenuous for a body part, so you may have an injury, it is about changing the task or the challenge by letting you feel that there are also other ways. Like, for example, if you would stretch your arm directly after the contact point, so you have like an overstretched arm, and then you look like a wooden branch at the end of the shot. If I would ask you to hit a cross-court shot that is angled and bounces not too deep after the net, then that would not be a possibility for you with that straight arm. So by giving you the feeling that all these tasks have consequences for the way you move, I can make sure that you don't start believing in one movement for you, but you get a lot of varieties in using your arm, your body, to accomplish the task. So it's very often to think of the thing that you are afraid of, which might be a problem later. Yeah. So in case of overspinning the ball, I would not give you a task where you need to spin. I will ask you to try and hit the ball low over the net and as deep as possible, because you can only do that if you have less spin or almost flat shot, and that will give you the experience of how to accomplish that.
So, okay, so let's just play this out a little bit for the viewers, because there may be some people that are wrestling with that. You set up a task. I understand it cognitively. If I'm a smart guy, hit the ball straight to Simon, through the court, make it rise in the back fence. But I can't do it. I understand you want me to hit less spin. I get it. I understand.
Yeah.
But that's my default technique, and I just can't hit through the ball or whatever. What do you do? Do you set up another implicit environment, or at some stage do you give in and go, I just need to tell the player to swing straight back to front, or to turn more frontal? What's your approach there?
Both, and even more. You can demonstrate it, or you can ask another player to demonstrate it. They can copy it and try it and feel it. In case they have an extreme Western grip, where they cannot get behind the ball and go through it, you may have to correct the grip a little bit. I prefer to let them feel the difference and say like, oh yeah, this is much better. So I try to let them find the answer, but if I need, I will tell them, and they will feel the difference. You can set up a different task where they have to do that. Sometimes you need, let's say, a heavy medicine ball, for example, to get the idea of making a long throwing movement to follow the ball. And you will also tell them that the hand behind the ball is not going to roll over, because the ball will not travel that far. So there are all kinds of ways to make examples, to make comparisons. So I use a lot of metaphors and try to get the image in their brain what it is about, because the brain is so much more intelligent than we think. We had a specialist in neuroscience many years ago who said that the brain is like the director of a big orchestra. And that means he cannot direct every individual player of the violin or the piano or whatever, but he makes it work together so that you get the great sound. And there's a lot of variation in that. And actually the brain is so clever, it can direct all these cooperation principles there so that you get a right approach to it. So that's where we have to be inventive and helpful.
Frank and Simon, I believe you have now touched something what could lead us to another hour of conversation, because at the beginning we started with a topic developing skills development or motor learning. And now actually what you are starting to combine and compare is actually developing the skills and correcting the skills.
Sure.
And for me, these are like two sides of the one continuum. On one side is correcting and developing.
Right.
By optimal teaching, I would call optimal, ideal teaching, you don't need correction because you develop the skills. Right. But we know that it's almost never really happened like that. Every kid finds a way to go to a side road that we don't want, and we have to correct it to come back to the main road. So I feel it also with this group of my son. Even though I really try to develop the skills, so it's always like staying on the main road and letting them find their ways. But yes, sometimes because of various reasons, they find a way to slip out of the main road, and then you have to correct a little bit. And here I believe it's something what very often the coach is also misunderstanding. Developing the skills through variations is one thing, and correcting, what I also believe is possible by applying the same way, by actually feeling different movements, is a great way to help player to correct, but sometimes it doesn't work. I agree with Simon also that actually, sometimes you have to actually take some perhaps other ways, or you have to take the way that helps the player. I like to say that the good drill is the one that helps your player. So sure. I'm not afraid to go in a different ways.
One of the things that I think we'd all agree with today, and we've used that expression very carefully, is that we want to make our players skillful. I mean, who doesn't want that? Mm-hmm. I don't want to make my players technical. You know, the technique is how you execute the skills. You know, what's the skill to do flat first serve, the skill to do a kick second serve, the skill to open up the court on the forehand, the skill to do a drop shot. It's not necessarily, the technique is behind that. So I don't necessarily like going on the court and teaching technique. I like going on the court to make my players more skillful. So that as a narrative is, I think, is a much more developmental one. It's a much more healthier one. You know, if you say to kids, right, the next drill we're going to do, kids, or you say the next skill you're going to learn, kids, is this. They are so much more receptive to the second one than the first one. It's like drills are like chores, you know, like cleaning your teeth, cleaning your bedroom. Kids don't want to do that. They want to learn skills, like collecting cards. You know, what skills have you got now on that card? So that's one thing. Now, if you want to make your kids skillful, you have to make them full of skills. So then what are those skills you need? Well, that depends on their age and stage of development. And I think we have to be careful not to teach a 5-year-old a second serve kick. You know, it's an obvious one to some, but it's not so obvious to others. So being developmentally appropriate on selecting which skills you need is the job of the coach. Now, when you want to improve and develop, and I know we'll come on to this in a different topic, the bit that I wanted to just kind of not debate with Frank, but just understand better, I guess, is I think the narrative from the skill acquisition people, the sports scientists, the university lecturers in learning, pedagogical understanding is create the environment and the skills will develop organically without much teaching, without much intervention. The game will do the teaching for you. And I think that, of course, can be true. But I think there's a caveat to that, which is it's still a pretty tough sport, tennis, and you have to be incredibly coordinated and just creating an environment sometimes I don't think necessarily gets people there fast. And you could say, and then the academics could say, well, yeah, but it's not about getting there fast. It's about getting there right and correctly and developmentally and appropriately. And if it takes a bit longer, but they get there on their own, it's better for their learning. And look, fair enough. There's probably loads of research to suggest that. But I just wondered if there was, it always seems like the last resort for the coach is to say anything. Like that's the last resort to say anything. Whereas some coaches will think it's the first resort to do it. You know, it's like just hit through the ball, hit straight, and you'll be fine. But what a lot of the academics will say is, no, don't say anything. Just stand back, let them figure it out themselves. Come on, back off a little bit, back off, set the environment, let the environment. And then if that doesn't work, do a different task, do a different task, do a different. And then if that doesn't work, then you can say it. But you've got to go through a lot of mud. You've got to punch your way through the woods before you're allowed to say anything technically. And I think that's the bit that a lot of experienced coaches would debate with us if they were on this call. So either of you can unpack that if you want. Good luck.
No, but I think it is like the two ends of a line, and somewhere in the middle, the principles meet each other, where you would, of course, help the player to find it a little bit faster than just letting him experiment and discover. So I'm quite patient as a teacher. But when I see that it is like, you know, taking too long or it's frustrating, then I will certainly help them to learn more quick. But don't give them the full answer, but just give them like a hint. And sometimes you see this that they say, oh, yeah, now I got it. And then, sure. You know, so it's still, when you talk about the principles, it's like guided discovery. So I know what you're going to discover. I may have to help you there, but then you can still find it, which is totally different than telling you exactly how to do it. Mm-hmm. And well, that is like copying the movement is different than installing the principles that can make it your personal forehand or your personal technique to master that skill. And that is, I think, what we have to be careful with, and we have to understand that somewhere in the middle of how we can teach, there's all these principles that you can use and that can make you more effective as a coach.
Right, Frank. If you agree, I would try to conclude our session today because we're already talking almost an hour. I don't know exactly, Simon, but you're controlling the watch. Obviously, we have just scratched the surface of developing motor learning or motor skills. And I hope that our audience got some inspiration to look for additional materials and to develop own additional ideas. Obviously, we didn't find out everything, and we will learn in the future about other ways to solve the problems or to guide our players, I'm sure. And also through this conversation, I also realized that we can find another topic for our conversation, like how the mental skills are influencing learning, or there are so many elements to be considered. So obviously planning of developing, of skill development is also essential for the coaches. So something what for sure we can touch in our next conversations. For today, I would like to thank you both guys, and I hope that our audience enjoyed our conversation. It was lively, and perhaps first time we were not 100% agree, but we are all on the same way, and we all like to help our players to be more skillful, as Simon said, and play the better game of tennis. Good luck in your work.
I have one more thing to add is, in case people would like to add something as comment under this clip, you know, we can also take that into account for a next time when people have questions or remarks or things. I think it would be good to get feedback from people all over the world to this topic or other topics. So let people just react if they like to do that.
Great idea. I hope we will get some questions and be able to answer them. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.